nerds, what's up? Today I want to talk about when we are going to get our next life-changing big fantasy work and some speculation on what it's going to be. See you after the jump. So, as far as I see it, there have been 3 works of fantasy that have really permeated our culture, and those are The Lord of the Rings, the OG Star Wars, and Harry Potter. Now, I know Star Wars isn't a book franchise, but I feel like it's kind of lumped in with these other 2 a lot, so we're going to include it. Now, The Lord of the Rings came out in the 1950s, Star Wars came out in the 1970s, and Harry Potter came out in the 1990s. And so it really feels like we're overdue, or at least at the right time period, to get that next big culturally changing thing. Now, why have I chosen these 3 things as the things that I consider the most culturally relevant? Well, I judge them on 2 main things. The first of those being cultural permanence. These things are multi-generational. They transcend the generation in which they are made. They are constantly popular. They never go out of style. They keep being reintroduced to the new generation and being just as big as they used to be. Now, I realize Harry Potter is the least untested of these, but I feel like it's pretty obvious that Harry Potter is here to stay. So I think it kind of fits the whole cultural permanence category. And number 2 is cultural vernacular. AKA, that means whether or not you've participated in any of these works, you know things about them. You would know the language surrounding them, whether or not you've participated in them. I mean, I have friends who have never seen a Harry Potter movie, who have never read a Harry Potter book, yet they know what a Hogwarts house is. Same with Star Wars. May the Force be with you. I am your father. Those things are inescapable. You know what they are, whether or not you've participated in them. And then, I mean, if I had a nickel for every time I saw "Not All Who Wander Are Lost" on a t-shirt or on a piece of merch, I'd be very rich. And I'm willing to bet like 50% of the people who use that quote don't even know it's from Lord of the Rings. Like, it has just gotten to the point where there's language from these 3 works that transcend the works themselves. Like, we have included these in our everyday just cultural way of speaking. And I think that is definitely what these 3 things have in common. Now, before we move on, I feel like I have to address the superhero thing. And as of recently, probably address more of Marvel and to a lesser extent, DC. Now, superheroes have been with us for a long time. The comics started in the 1950s. And so it feels like they should belong on this list, but for some reason I feel like it's a very different animal. I have a hard time articulating exactly why, but I think it is because they have been reinvented so many times, and there's not a particular instance of the superhero that is more with us than the other reinventions. I mean, we've known about Batman and Superman and Wonder Woman and Spider-Man and Thor for so long, and they are definitely in cultural permanence. They're definitely in our vernacular, but I feel like they've been reinvented so many times, and not one iteration is more necessarily prominent than the other. I think it may be because of the comic book style, where there are a lot of different stories. Now, I haven't read the original comic books, but from what I've heard, there's kind of like a lot of time travel or alternate timelines or things that allow the comics to keep going. And because of that, there are so many different ways these stories can play out. I mean, even as we've seen recently, we've had 3 different Spider-Mans, and has one been more culturally relevant than the other? I can't necessarily say. So I feel like because of that, even though there's a lot of vernacular that comes out of it, it's not just like one thing I can point to and be like, that's the thing. It's just superheroes in general. And because of that, I'm not including it in our list of 3 fantasy things. I also think it may be because a lot of people don't consider it fantasy, which is very silly. Obviously, it's very fantasy and actually more a lot of sci-fi, I would say. But I just don't really feel like it fits in here. I would take arguments against that. So let me know in the comments if you disagree and think it should be included in our 3. But for the sake of this video, I'm really focusing on Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, and Harry Potter. So the question is, what's the next big thing? Well, surprisingly, the 3 works I've mentioned have a lot in common with each other. At this point, I should mention that I will be spoiling The Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, and Harry Potter in this video, but like at this point, we've all seen it, or if we're not going to, we're not going to at this point, right? But if you're really young and you have not seen the original Star Wars trilogy or read all the Harry Potter books, please stop this video because I will be saying very big spoilers. Let's move on. So the first thing they all have in common is that they all follow a very classic hero's journey. Each of these works has a clear hero: Harry Potter, Frodo Baggins, and Luke Skywalker. Here's a handy little chart I found. I'll link the source below about what the hero's journey is. If you look at the steps in the hero's journey, it's shocking how closely all 3 of these works, even though they seem different, follow this journey. All of them have to leave their ordinary world, right? We've got Harry in the Muggle world. We've got Luke Skywalker with his aunt and uncle. We've got Frodo Baggins in the Shire. They each have a call to adventure. They each meet up with a bunch of allies. They each face a series of challenges, like very clearly. I'm not going to go into details, but we can think of those from all three of these works. And it goes on and on. In fact, one thing that's not even in this hero's journey, but they all contain, is a wise older mentor. Like we have Gandalf, Dumbledore, and Obi-Wan Kenobi. Like the similarities between them is actually like pretty funny in my opinion. And then we all have the return, like a very clear return. You know, we have Harry in the 7th book at his aunt and uncle's house for the last time. Or even you can consider the very ending, the epilogue of the book where he goes back to the train station again. We have Frodo Baggins going back to the Shire. And you've heard about my opinion of the Scouring of the Shire. It's needed. It's part of the hero's journey. Like, they follow this journey very closely in all three works. Number 2, they're all very classic good against evil fights. This one is very interesting to me because I feel like we love our gray villains, particularly recently. Like I feel we've been really liking more nuanced even heroes. Like there's been a lot of anti-hero recently and a lot of these sympathetic villains. But all three of these works are very classic good versus evil. Like if you think of the villains, Voldemort, Darth Vader, maybe the Emperor you would count, and Sauron, like they're all very classic evil villains. So I think that's interesting that they have that, and our heroes are the very classic, trying their best, good underdog hero. It's a very similar story. It's a very tale as old as time sort of story. It's not really reinventing the wheel, which I think is kind of interesting. I don't know if this speaks to us as human beings to always want to see the hopeful stories, or maybe it's just more of a generalization, right? For something to become very big, it needs to have wide mass appeal. So maybe these classic stories that we've really known for a long time have the wider appeal, and maybe it's more just kind of like the fantasy nerds who read a lot that like those kind of different, more gray things as something new. I don't really know the reason. I just thought that was very interesting. Number 3, they all have strong themes of redemption. So even though we have this classic hero versus villain that I just discussed, all of them also have a lot of redemption themes. Lord of the Rings kind of has a redemption theme throughout the entire thing. We have Harry Potter and Snape. Whether or not you like him or not, it is written as a redemption story. And then finally, Darth Vader, obviously classic redemption story at the very end. So I think that's interesting as well. Again, hope. All three of these stories have an abundance of hope in them. Classic good, classic hope, classic everything's okay and we all win in the end. I think that's an interesting comparison. Number 4, they're all family friendly. I actually think this one is really important. And even though we could maybe consider the Lord of the Rings a little less kid-friendly today because of the kind of old-timey language or whatever, I still feel like it's typically read to very young children. It's clearly appropriate. Harry Potter and Star Wars, again, are usually seen at very young ages. And I think this plays an important factor because nostalgia is such a huge thing. So we consumed these things when we were young. Therefore, when we grow up, we have a lot of nostalgia for our past. We want to pass it on, so we show it to our own children and on and on and on. I think consuming these things very young does play a role. For example, I've had an adult friend who tried to read Harry Potter as an adult, and they struggled with it. I'm a huge Harry Potter fan, like huge, and they worried that I'd be mad about that, but I was honestly like, no, I kind of get it. Like, if you didn't consume this as a kid, it may be hard to consume it as an adult. And I think that's with a lot, like, The Lord of the Rings, I think the least of these, but with Star Wars and Harry Potter, I can actually understand that. So I think the family-friendly nature and having us have this rooted in nostalgia is a very important part in why these three pieces of work have lasted and been as multi-generational as they have been. So the question I want to pose is, what's our next big thing? What's the next, like, blown out of proportion, over the top, everybody in the world is involved in this, everybody knows what it is, it's here to stay and it's not going anywhere. What's it going to be? Now, it's probably honestly going to be something from middle grade or YA. Just looking at the past works, like, that's probably what it's going to be. The problem is I can't really offer any opinions on that. I haven't read YA in probably about a decade. I really moved on from YA kind of mid-college, and so it's been a while. I don't really know what's going on there. And middle grade, I'm just starting to read with my son, but we're kind of going with the old classics. Like, I'm reading Phantom Tollbooth with him and The Secret of Platform 13. We're not really like seeing new stuff. So I kind of have a question for you guys. If you read a lot of middle grade or YA, do you think this seminal work has already been produced? Is there something that I haven't seen that's like on the up and up and you think once it gets made into a movie or a TV show, that's gonna be the thing? So let me know in the comments below. I don't have anything to offer. I can say some things about maybe an adult fantasy, and I think the most obvious cultural fantasy phenomenon in recent years has clearly been Game of Thrones. Now, I feel like I'm uniquely situated to talk about Game of Thrones in this light because I have not read a single page of Game of Thrones and I have not seen a single second of the TV show. Yes, I have not participated in the Game of Thrones at all. That's the reason I feel like I can say it has cultural relevance. I know winter is coming, Mother of Dragons, Red Wedding. Like, I know all of these terminologies. I know all these things about Game of Thrones, even though I literally have not participated in them. I feel like that's pretty incredible. Like, it has permeated our culture to a point that we all know language from the Game of Thrones. But I don't think it's gonna be it. I know that's probably hard for Game of Thrones fans to hear, but here's why. The first one I think is the least important point and the point that I'm probably least qualified to talk on, so I may get things wrong, let me know in the comments. From what I've heard about Game of Thrones, it does not necessarily seem like these classic good versus evil, hero's journey, redemption sort of stories. I feel like Game of Thrones became popular because it was different than that. It was messy and gray and anti-hero. Now again, I don't know that because I have not read it. That is just what I've heard. So I'd be interested to hear your comments if that's true. So that doesn't necessarily matter. Our next big fantasy thing may buck those tropes, but I do think it's interesting that from what I know, it doesn't fit into that. Second, it's not family friendly. This is the one I think that actually hurts it the most. Because it's not family friendly, you're not showing this to your kids. I mean, I don't want to be judgmental, but I hope you're not showing it to your young kids. You probably wouldn't show it to them until they were a teenager. And I feel like the nostalgia is a little less strong for a teen. So I feel like as adults, we're not like so nostalgic for this that we're gonna show it to our young kids because we can't. So we might have fun showing it to our teenager, but I just have a harder time thinking that that will continue the trajectory generation after generation. I may be wrong, but I kind of think that. The last thing is everything I've heard is nobody liked the ending, and I think that has tainted the entire series. I've heard a lot of people say, I would have rewatched this, but I can't because all I can think of is the ending. Now, people feel differently about that, but I do feel like the ending that disappointed so many people really had a bad effect on the legacy of Game of Thrones. So for those reasons, I think Game of Thrones won't be it, though I do think it's come the closest of any adult thing we've seen. Otherwise, all the adult fantasy I love, like even Sanderson, I have a hard time seeing it coming into light. His stuff is more family friendly, but it hasn't been picked up for any movie or TV deals. There's still a chance it probably will happen. I still struggle seeing that it's gonna be that next big thing. So I don't know what it is, but I feel like we're due for it. So honestly, I think the next big thing hasn't been published yet, or at least it hasn't been picked up yet. I'm very curious to know what you think it is. Do you think it's been published? Are we gonna have a next big thing? Has the way media is produced changed so much that you think we won't have something of that nature again? I'm just curious. It's been about like 30 years, and that seems to be like the direct amount of time between all these big things. So let me know in the comments what you think it's gonna be. If you think Game of Thrones could be it and you think my analysis was wrong, what you thought about me not including the whole Marvel universe. Let me know in the comments below. And as always, if you like these kind of videos, please subscribe. That is the best way to support me. And if you want to see what I'm currently reading and maybe commentary on other nerd things, you can follow me on Instagram at bookborn.reviews. I'll see you next time. Bye.